Declared public enemy number one by the Chicago Crime Commission in 2013, Joaquín El Chapo Guzmán was a notorious Mexican drug lord who led the Sinaloa cartel, one of the world's most powerful and violent drug trafficking organizations. Born in 1957 in the small village of La Tuna, Guzmán rose from poverty to control a sprawling drug empire responsible for smuggling vast quantities of cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, and marijuana into the United States and beyond. Guzmán became infamous not only for his criminal operations but also for his dramatic prison escapes, particularly one in 2015. While held in a maximum security prison in Mexico, he escaped through a sophisticated, mile-long tunnel dug beneath his cell. The tunnel featured lighting, ventilation, and even a motorcycle mounted on rails, highlighting the extraordinary lengths his cartel went to secure his freedom. This escape made international headlines and embarrassed Mexican authorities, who launched a massive manhunt to recapture him. In 2016, El Chapo was finally apprehended and extradited to the United States in 2017 to face justice. At his 2019 trial in New York, he was convicted on a staggering 10 counts, including drug trafficking, money laundering, and participation in a criminal enterprise. Evidence presented during the trial detailed his cartel's brutality, use of corruption, and innovative smuggling techniques. The penalties were severe. Guzmán was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 30 years. He was also ordered to forfeit $12.6 billion, representing the proceeds of his drug trafficking operations. The Chicago Crime Commission named Guzmán public enemy number one for the influence of his criminal network in Chicago. The last person to receive such notoriety for drugs in Chicago was Al Capone in 1930. Currently, Guzmán is serving his sentence in the U.S. Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility in Florence, Colorado, often referred to as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, ensuring he remains behind bars for the rest of his life. Charles "Lucky" Luciano, born Salvatore Lucania in 1897 in Sicily, was a pivotal figure in the history of organized crime in the United States. Often regarded as the father of modern organized crime, Luciano revolutionized the mafia structure and operations, transforming it into a more corporate-style organization. He is best known for establishing the Commission, a governing body for organized crime families that sought to mediate disputes and maintain order within the underworld. Declared public enemy number one by New York Special Prosecutor Thomas Dewey in 1936. Luciano rose to power in the 1920s and 1930s, capitalizing on prohibition to build a vast empire of bootlegging, gambling, and prostitution operations. He was instrumental in eliminating the traditional boss of all bosses system, which often led to bloody power struggles, and instead promoted a more democratic model of leadership. This reorganization allowed for greater cooperation between crime families and led to the mafia's golden age of influence. His criminal exploits extended beyond his business acumen. Luciano was known for his ruthlessness, including his role in the infamous Castellamarese War, a violent conflict between rival mafia factions. After orchestrating the murder of his former boss, Joe Masuria, and his rival, Salvatore Maranzano, Luciano became the undisputed leader of the New York underworld. Luciano's activities were not without controversy. He was a prominent figure in prostitution rings, which brought significant public outrage and legal attention. While some argue that Luciano's modernization of the mafia reduced internal violence, others point out that it also expanded the mafia's reach into various facets of American society, from labor unions to legitimate businesses. Additionally, Luciano's wartime cooperation with the U.S. government remains a topic of debate. During World War II, he allegedly assisted the U.S. Navy in securing the New York docks from potential sabotage, leveraging his influence over the waterfront unions. This deal, known as Operation Underworld, led to some leniency in his eventual sentencing. In 1936, Luciano's criminal empire began to unravel when he was convicted on charges of compulsory prostitution, largely based on the testimony of sex workers and law enforcement's crackdown on his operations. He was sentenced to 30 to 50 years in prison, a significant blow to his underworld dominance. However, Luciano's wartime cooperation earned him an early release in 1946. As part of the arrangement, he was deported to Italy, despite having spent most of his life in the United States. From there, he attempted to maintain some influence over international drug trafficking, but his power waned over time. Luciano spent his later years under close surveillance and largely out of the limelight. Luciano died of a heart attack in 1962 at the Naples airport. His legacy is a complex one, marked by his role in shaping organized crime into a far-reaching, sophisticated network, while also being remembered as one of the most ruthless and influential figures in mafia history. Alvin Karpis, born Alvin Francis Karpovich on August 10, 1907, in Montreal, Canada, was a notorious American criminal and one of the most infamous figures of the Great Depression-era gangsters. Known as Creepy due to his sinister smile, Karpis was a central figure in the Barker-Karpis gang, one of the most feared criminal organizations of the time. Karpis's criminal career began with petty thefts in his youth, but it escalated in the 1920s when he partnered with Fred and Doc Barker, sons of Ma Barker, the gang's matriarch. The gang engaged in a series of high-profile crimes, including bank robberies, burglaries, and kidnappings. Their most infamous exploits included the 1933 kidnapping of William Ham, a Minnesota brewer, and the 1934 abduction of Edward Bremer, a wealthy banker. Both crimes resulted in large ransom payouts and intensified federal attention on the gang. The FBI's relentless pursuit of Karpis culminated in 1936 when Director J. Edgar Hoover personally led the operation to capture him in New Orleans. Karpis was apprehended without incident, marking a significant victory for the Bureau and cementing Hoover's reputation as a crime-fighting icon. He became one of the few criminals to be labeled Public Enemy No. 1 by the FBI and was the last one captured alive during that era. Karpis stood trial and was sentenced to life imprisonment, spending over 26 years at Alcatraz, where he became the prison's longest-serving inmate. While incarcerated, Karpis demonstrated intelligence, teaching himself multiple skills and maintaining a low profile. He was later transferred to other federal prisons and eventually paroled in 1969. After his release, Karpis was deported to Canada, though he later settled in Spain. He published an autobiography, On the Rock, detailing his life of crime and experiences in Alcatraz. Karpis lived a relatively quiet life until his death in 1979, reportedly from natural causes, though some speculate foul play. Despite his violent past, Karpis remains a fascinating figure in the annals of American crime history, symbolizing the turbulent and lawless era of the 1930s. Declared Public Enemy No. 1 by the FBI after the death of Pretty Boy Floyd, Babyface Nelson, born Lester Joseph Gillis on December 6, 1908, in Chicago, Illinois, was one of the most infamous bank robbers of the Great Depression era. Known for his youthful appearance, which earned him his nickname, Nelson was also notorious for his violent temper and ruthless behavior. Nelson's criminal career began in his teenage years with auto theft and armed robbery in Chicago's underworld. By the early 1930s, he had joined the infamous gang led by John Dillinger, participating in a string of high-profile bank robberies across the Midwest. Nelson was particularly noted for his reckless use of violence, earning a reputation as one of the most dangerous criminals of his time. His criminal exploits included several deadly shootouts with law enforcement, most notably the infamous Battle of Little Bohemia in April 1934, where Nelson's aggression led to civilian casualties and further intensified the FBI's pursuit. Unlike some of his contemporaries, Nelson displayed a complete disregard for human life, often shooting at law enforcement and civilians without hesitation. The FBI's manhunt for Nelson reached its climax in late 1934. On November 27, 1934, Nelson was involved in a violent confrontation with FBI agents in Barrington, Illinois, known as the Battle of Barrington. Nelson was severely wounded during the gunfight, but not before killing two FBI agents, Samuel Cowley and Herman Hollis. Despite his injuries, Nelson and his wife managed to flee the scene. However, he succumbed to his wounds later that evening, dying at the age of 25. Unlike many of his peers, Nelson never stood trial or faced imprisonment. His short yet explosive criminal career left a trail of chaos and bloodshed, cementing his legacy as one of the most feared and violent figures of the era. Babyface Nelson's life and actions exemplify the lawlessness of the Great Depression's gangster era, and his death marked the end of one of the FBI's most intense pursuits. Charles Arthur Pretty Boy Floyd, born on February 3, 1904, in Bartow County, Georgia, was a notorious American gangster and bank robber during the Great Depression. Known for his good looks, which earned him his nickname, Floyd gained notoriety not only for his criminal exploits but also for his complex public image as a folk hero in the Midwest. Floyd's criminal career began with small-time thefts, but he quickly graduated to bank robbery in the late 1920s. Operating mainly in the Midwest, Floyd and his associates robbed numerous banks, often destroying mortgage records during their heists, a move that endeared him to struggling farmers and earned him the nickname Robin Hood of the Cookson Hills. Despite his violent methods, This perception as a benefactor to the poor gained him widespread sympathy among some segments of the public. Declared public enemy number one by the FBI after the death of John Dillinger, Floyd's activities drew increasing attention from law enforcement, and he became a target of the FBI. He was implicated in several violent crimes, including the Kansas City Massacre in 1933, during which 4 law enforcement officers were killed in a botched attempt to free a prisoner. Though Floyd denied involvement, this event marked a turning point, solidifying his reputation as one of America's most dangerous criminals. The FBI launched an extensive manhunt, with Floyd frequently evading capture by moving between safe houses and relying on local supporters. His luck ran out on October 22, 1934, when he was cornered by FBI agents and local law enforcement near East Liverpool, Ohio. After a brief chase and gunfight, Floyd was shot and killed, dying at the age of 30. Controversy surrounds the details of his death, with conflicting accounts of whether he was shot while fleeing or executed after being subdued. Floyd never stood trial or faced imprisonment, and his death marked the end of a criminal career that was as infamous as it was mythologized. To this day, Pretty Boy Floyd remains a symbol of the turbulent and lawless era of the Great Depression. John Herbert Dillinger, born on June 22, 1903, in Indianapolis, Indiana, was one of America's most infamous criminals of the Great Depression era. Known for his charisma and daring bank robberies, Dillinger captured public attention and became a symbol of rebellion against authority during a time of economic hardship. Dillinger's criminal career began after a troubled youth and a failed attempt to settle down. In 1924, he was arrested for a botched grocery store robbery and sentenced to prison. During his 9-year incarceration, Dillinger honed his criminal skills and built connections with seasoned criminals who later became members of his gang. Released in 1933, Dillinger wasted no time launching into a string of high-profile bank robberies across the Midwest, often employing innovative tactics and meticulous planning. Dillinger's exploits were marked by their boldness and efficiency, as well as his use of escape artistry. His most famous escape occurred in 1934, when he broke out of the Crown Point, Indiana jail using a wooden gun he allegedly carved himself. His escapes, coupled with his Robin Hood-like persona and disdain for authority, earned him widespread notoriety and, for some, admiration. Dillinger's actions drew the full attention of the FBI, which declared him public enemy number one. A nationwide manhunt ensued, with Dillinger continuously evading capture through a network of safe houses and allies. Despite his cunning, his luck ran out on July 22, 1934, when the FBI, acting on a tip from Anna Sage, the infamous woman in red, ambushed Dillinger outside the Biograph Theater in Chicago. As he attempted to flee, Dillinger was fatally shot, marking the end of a career that lasted less than 2 years. Declared public enemy number one by the FBI in 1934, Dillinger's death sparked both public mourning and celebration, reflecting his status as a divisive figure. While law enforcement viewed him as a ruthless criminal, others saw him as a daring outlaw who defied a corrupt system during desperate times. Declared public enemy number one by Detroit in 1930, Angelo Meli, born on February 10, 1897, in San Cataldo, Sicily, was a prominent figure in organized crime in Detroit, Michigan, during the mid-20th century. A co-founder of the Detroit Partnership, Meli was instrumental in shaping the city's mafia organization into one of the most stable and powerful crime syndicates in the United States. Meli immigrated to the United States as a child and settled in Detroit, where he became involved in criminal activities during Prohibition. Like many others, he saw the illegal liquor trade as a lucrative opportunity and quickly established himself as a key player. Meli was known for his ability to mediate disputes and forge alliances, traits that helped him rise to prominence within Detroit's criminal underworld. In the early 1930s, Meli played a pivotal role in consolidating various factions of the Detroit underworld into the Detroit Partnership, a mafia organization affiliated with a broader American mafia network. The partnership controlled numerous illegal enterprises, including gambling, loan sharking, extortion, and narcotics. Meli's influence extended beyond Detroit, as he maintained connections with other mafia families across the country. Despite his prominence, Meli was known for his low-profile approach, avoiding the flashy behavior that drew law enforcement attention to other mobsters. However, his criminal activities did not go unnoticed. Throughout his career, Meli faced investigations and indictments related to racketeering, tax evasion, and other charges. The FBI and local authorities pursued him and his associates, but Meli's legal acumen and connections often allowed him to evade serious consequences. One of the most notable legal challenges Meli faced came in the 1940s, when federal authorities targeted him and other Detroit mobsters for their involvement in organized crime. While he spent short periods in custody, Meli managed to avoid lengthy imprisonment due to a combination of skilled legal defense and his ability to keep a step ahead of investigators. Angelo Meli remained a significant figure in organized crime until his death on December 1, 1969. He passed away of natural causes, leaving behind a legacy as a key architect of the Detroit Mafia and one of its most influential leaders. His life exemplifies the calculated and enduring power of organized crime in 20th-century America. Alphonse Al Capone, born on January 17, 1899, in Brooklyn, New York, was one of the most infamous mobsters in American history. Rising to power during Prohibition, Capone became synonymous with organized crime, violence, and corruption in Chicago during the 1920s and early 1930s. Declared public enemy number one by Detroit in 1930, Capone's criminal career began in New York, where he joined the Five Points Gang as a young man. After a violent altercation left him with 3 scars on his face, earning him the nickname Scarface, Capone moved to Chicago in 1919 to work for Johnny Torrio, a prominent mob boss. When Torrio retired following an assassination attempt in 1925, Capone took over the operation, quickly expanding it into a vast criminal empire that controlled illegal alcohol distribution, gambling, and prostitution. Capone's wealth and influence made him a celebrity, but his reign was marked by extreme violence. The 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre, in which 7 members of a rival gang were gunned down, is one of the most infamous events linked to Capone, cementing his reputation as a ruthless crime lord. Despite his public persona as a charitable businessman, Capone's activities earned him relentless pursuit by law enforcement. Capone's downfall came not from his violent crimes but from tax evasion. In 1931, after years of investigation, he was indicted and convicted on federal charges of failing to pay taxes on his enormous illicit income. Sentenced to 11 years in prison, Capone was first incarcerated at the Atlanta Penitentiary and later transferred to Alcatraz, where his health began to decline due to untreated syphilis. Released in 1939 after serving nearly 8 years, Capone returned to his mansion in Palm Island, Florida, where he lived in semi-retirement. His physical and mental health deteriorated, and he largely withdrew from public life. On January 25, 1947, Capone died of a heart attack, brought on by complications from syphilis. Al Capone's legacy endures as a symbol of the excess corruption and lawlessness of the Prohibition era. Despite his infamy, he remains one of the most iconic figures in the history of organized crime. Osama bin Laden, born on March 10, 1957, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, was the founder of Al-Qaeda, the Islamist militant organization responsible for some of the deadliest terrorist attacks in history. Born into a wealthy family with ties to the Saudi construction industry, bin Laden lived a privileged early life, studying economics and business at King Abdulaziz University. Bin Laden's path to terrorism began during the Soviet-Afghan War in the 1980s, where he supported the Mujahideen fighting against Soviet forces. Using his wealth and influence, he helped fund and organize fighters, earning a reputation as a leader within the Islamist movement. After the war, bin Laden became increasingly radicalized, opposing Western influence in the Middle East and particularly the presence of U.S. troops in Saudi Arabia following the Gulf War. In 1988, bin Laden founded Al-Qaeda, initially as a network to continue the fight for Islamic causes. Over time, Al-Qaeda evolved into a global terrorist organization, targeting Western nations and their allies. Bin Laden's anti-American sentiment culminated in several attacks, including the 1998 bombings of U.S. embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, and the 2000 bombing of the USS Cole. His most infamous act came on September 11, 2001, when Al-Qaeda orchestrated coordinated attacks on the United States, resulting in the deaths of nearly 3,000 people. The 9/11 attacks involved the hijacking of 4 commercial airplanes, 2 of which were flown into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center, another into the Pentagon, and a 4th that crashed in Pennsylvania after passengers intervened. This act solidified bin Laden as the most wanted man in the world. Following 9/11, bin Laden was declared public enemy number 1 by the U.S., and became a fugitive, eluding capture for nearly a decade despite an extensive international manhunt led by the U.S. He is believed to have moved between various hideouts in Afghanistan and Pakistan, using his network to remain concealed. On May 2, 2011, U.S. Navy SEALs located and killed bin Laden in a covert operation at a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. His death marked the end of a long pursuit but left a legacy of global terrorism and a deeply altered world landscape in the fight against extremism. Thanks for watching. If you're interested in this type of content, please consider leaving a like and subscribing for more. I appreciate every single one of you.